All right, so let's get started today. As you guys hopefully remember, I postponed exercise 223 last week. So we didn't have it on Wednesday of last week. So that means we're having it today instead. On Wednesday, we'll jump to exercise 225. So 224 was technically the working day catch-up day, but I did it a day early. So we're slightly out of order, but next class will be 225. So don't panic when there isn't a 225 going forward. So 223, hopefully you guys used your time wisely. You're caught up, you have great buildings. You're all ready for these final renderings. And that's really what today is about. We're going to talk about doing the exterior night rendering, which is the fourth of the 4 required renderings for the final. We'll spend a little bit of time. I may go off on some tangents for the fun of it today. We may talk about fountains and pools and some of that because why wouldn't we, right? And the end result today is, again, a rendering. It should be an exterior night rendering. I will qualify a true night rendering or a sunset view as a night rendering. Likewise, if you want to do a sunset view and a true night rendering, I will qualify the sunset rendering as a daytime rendering. So the sunset one is kind of in the middle, and you can float it to either side if you want to. But we're going to continue to kind of work around all of these same strategies that we've talked about before. So let me minimize that right now. And I started trying to open things up here. As we're getting ready, I want to point out a couple things that you should be doing now that we're starting to work on the remote desktop and we're starting to do a lot more of the final renderings. And that is when you first open up Rhino, open up the V-Ray asset editor. Oh, I have to change the default renderer here. Open up that asset editor and download all the materials that are missing, because that's going to plague you with problems down the road. So come on. Let's go ahead and download that, just so that they're local on the machine. The other thing is, when you log into your flash drive, I'm going to remind you again about that caffeine app. So I have it stored on my flash drive right here. I have a link. I sent you guys a link to it before. I can give it to you again. We want to be running the caffeine 64. You can run it right off your OneDrive. And when that starts, you'll see a little coffee pot down in your taskbar by the clock. And you want to right click on that and say active for, and I'm choosing 8 hours. That's my default. The 24 never really works for me. So I'm going to choose 8 hours as my active time. And you'll actually see with my keystroke logger here that about every minute, a little F15 will pop up. And that's because the keystroke logger is keeping this whole window active and running. Or excuse me, the caffeine program is keeping this whole window. There it is, the F15, active and running. And so that'll help me not only when I'm doing renders, not to lose it, but if I walk away from my computer and I come back, it should still be up. Also, if you accidentally get disconnected, you have a bad internet connection, when you go to log back in, it should give you the same computer when you come back. So you don't have to re-log in everything. So that's something that's really worthwhile. The other thing is, after we're syncing with OneDrive, when you download things, think about all the resources that you might be using that need to be downloaded as well. And so, for example, I have some blocks inside my Rhino folder here in my resources. I'm going to make sure that I right click on it and say always keep on this device. And it's going to download those blocks ahead of time for me. Likewise, when I get to my main folder that contains all the stuff for this semester, right here, my artist retreat folder, again, I have multiple years here, but for this year, I make sure that as soon as I log into the computer, I'm choosing to keep everything on this device. And that means that all the files, all the reference files, all the extra data that's stored is all going to be downloaded and included directly on this machine. And that's going to save problems later on. So I've done that. And I now went ahead and I opened up the Tahoe master site. That's the one I'm working with for right now. And we want to set this up for our nighttime render. So the first thing that we need to do, let me make this big here, is we need to set up our view. I do have a view that's already been set up. So if I went to my set view and I went to the render 1 view, for example, I already set this view up and I was reasonably happy with this view. And with this view set up, I could just go ahead and render it. However, I need to make sure that the night is actually set and ready to load. So I've had a number of students, including Naomi, who talked about the fact that some of these quick rendering setups aren't downloading. I'm going to check them live as we go just to see if they'll work for me or not. If not, I am happy to email you these files just in case. So let me scroll down here, and I have my basic night scene 1, basic night scene 2, and then below that I have my sunset scenes. I do like the sunset scene 2, and I've used that in this class already. We'll come back and we'll play around with that. Once you have these set up, it's easy to kind of flip through them. So let's look at this basic night scene 2 right here. I'm going to go ahead and download. Oh, that's not the current version, is it? This should be a VR opt file, which it is conveniently not. Well, that's annoying. So that's okay. Let's work through it. So I'm going to have to set some of this stuff up, and then I'll update this and give you a link to it. So let me download the Moonlight zip. I'm going to right click on it and say save link as. And we're going to save it onto my flash drive, and I would save it into my resources folder. I have a folder called V-Ray. I have a V-Ray HDRI folder, and then I have it separated out by day and night. I already have the Moonlight right here, so I don't really need to download it again. Okay. Once I've downloaded, I have to extract that zip file. So it needs to, you need to make sure that it's extracted on your flash drive. So if I went into my resources folder here, and I went to V-Ray, and I went to HDRI, let's go into the night HDRIs. It was the Moonlight one. And I need to make sure that it's actually extracted. So I have the Moonlight and I have the Moonlight GI. Those are the two files that I need. So let's go ahead and let's set this one up manually. I'm going to leave this page up so that I can refer to it. Let's go and open up my scene here. I'm going to open up the V-Ray asset editor, and we're going to go into the settings. So now, right now, I have this set up so that it's a daytime render. Okay. I have already saved it, but I could save it before. It's good practice to get into that. I would click on save. We'll put it into today's folder, I hope. That was not today's folder. There we go. And so you see I have retreat day settings. I have retreat night settings, interior. Let's go ahead and save this as retreat day settings exterior. That's what I have. I don't know for sure that this is a good one because I haven't done the test render and I don't remember where I was on this particular scene, but we'll save it. Then I'm going to revert all to the default settings. So again, I'm in settings and I'll click on the revert settings to the default options. There we go. Now let's go through and set this up. Like I said, I'm missing the VR opt file. So in that case, I can't just load it in. So we'll do it manually. I'm going to take the quality. I'm going to bump it all the way up to maximum. Under my camera and my exposure, it's probably going to be a lower value. So let's leave it at 10 right now. We're going to have to go back and check on that as we go forward. So I'll set my exposure value at 10. Let's come down here into render output, and I'm going to match what I'm seeing on the screen. So let's go to match viewport, and we'll go ahead and close that. Actually, this would be a good point to point something else out. I can automatically save the image when it's done rendering. So this isn't a bad idea to start turning on now that we're getting to final images. So I'm going to save the image. It's going to ask me for the file path. And this is just kind of backup here. Let's go here. Let's make a folder for final renders. And we'll save it into this folder. Okay. Notice the save as type. Some of you have had trouble with the save as type. When you save a PNG, it's not saving the background. So let's change the save as type to JPEG. And let's look at our image options here. Right, we're saving at 100% quality. Let's save a separate alpha channel. All right, all that looks good. We're not doing animations, so we can leave that unchecked. Let's go to environment. So this is where we need to load up that environment. So our background now is going to be set for that Moonlight settings. So let's go ahead and clear this. I'm going to right click on the checkerboard and choose clear. Then I'll go ahead and click on the checkerboard again, and we're going to choose a bitmap. And I'm going to go into my HDRIs. So let's go to my resources, V-Ray, HDRIs, night, and we were doing the moonlight. So we have moonlight and we have moonlight GI. We're going to use moonlight. We'll say open. Good. We can see the preview. We open the drawer to the right. And let's go ahead and jump back to our settings. And now that's in. While we're here, let's look at our settings here. Okay, so our background is going to be set to 0.25. So that's this value right here. It's going to be 0.25. And our GI, we're going to turn it on. We'll click on the checkerboard and choose bitmap. Oops. And we will use the moonlight GI. There it is. Let's go back to our settings. And if I'm not mistaken, that was left at 1. Yes, it is. Okay. Sun should be turned off. So I need to make sure I do that. So let's jump down into my V-Ray here. Now I have two ways of turning it off. The sun theoretically is on its own layer. So I should have a layer for environment, and then the sun should be on that. So I could set it up. Let's do it. Environment. Let's do a sublayer for sun. And then we would take the sun, right click it and say change object layer. And then I can simply turn off the sun. The alternative to that would be to go to our lights and then to actually uncheck this so that it goes away and is turned off. Either way will get us there. So I have the sun turned off. Let's go back to our settings. We've got our environment set. We've got our GI set. The rest of this can be turned off. I did mention the swarm earlier. We can turn the swarm on just in case it helps. It's not going to detract anything, but we might as well turn it on just in case. So all of these settings are correct now. So now that we have these settings correct, let's do a test render. Now, to get this test render set right, instead of doing the large output, I'm going to dramatically shrink this output. So let's make the width, let's say 200 by 94. Okay, so it's small, but that's going to hopefully speed up the renderings. Let me save this. That's my Rhino file. And let's go ahead and click on the teapot to do a little test render. And like I said, this is meant to be small. All right, so in this scenario, it really doesn't look too bad, right? My exposure seems set fairly well. Maybe it's a little bit overexposed in here. So let's go back. I'm gonna stop the render. We'll go back to the asset editor. We'll open up camera and we'll increase this exposure value. Let's try 12. And we'll go back and render again. So again, I'm doing it in small format here. Actually, I could zoom in the frame buffer once it starts building it out. And you can see that it'll be really blurry, but it's enough of a preview to kind of get a sense. All right, that's not too bad. I can see a little bit of the background. Yeah, I'm okay with that. So now that I have the settings correct, let's stop that. We'll come back here, we'll increase the size. So I'll go back to my render output. I'm going to increase this size. Ideally, when we get to the final renderings, we'd like it to be the smaller number to be 1080, which is what would display on a TV screen nicely. Not quite a 4K. And then let's go ahead and save these settings. So I have all my settings set up. We'll click on the save icon here. And so this is now going to be our VR opt. We're going to save it into our flash drive here. And this is the night settings, and this would be exterior. Okay, and I'll go ahead and click on save. So as we said before, this now preserves it, and I can go back and I can use it again. Furthermore, now that I have these settings, I could jump over into the ocean scene and use these same settings and load them in. So now that we have that set up and we're ready, let's start thinking about how we want to showcase this building as a whole. So right now the lights are inside and they're spilling out onto the outside, but maybe I'd like to do some uplighting on the building, or I'd like to light the building from the outside in some capacity. So to do that, I need to start installing some more lights. So let's think about what if I wanted to put some little spotlights and do some uplighting. So let me orbit around here a little bit. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a spotlight. And I may do this on the lighting layer, make a layer for exterior. Let's make that active. And then let's go ahead and try a spotlight. So I'll come down here to spotlight. And let me turn on my end and mid snap. We'll set that as a point. I'm going to do the same ratios that I've been doing. So my diameter would be 2 feet. And my end of the cone would be at 1 foot. It might be easier to do this in the top view. Right, so I'll say 1 foot here. And that makes that cone. Let's go ahead and move this so that it's inside. Now, obviously, this is pointing directly at the building, but I want to rotate it up a little bit. And I can do that in the side view here. So this is also a good place where the gumball might help out. So I can turn the gumball on and I can just shift this. So about like that. So now it's pointing up at the building. Maybe it needs to go a little bit higher. We may have to make some adjustments to kind of see. There it is. So let's think about what the settings on that light should be. Let's go into V-Ray. I'm opening my asset editor. There it is for my spotlight. And I'm going to rename this. We'll call this exterior spot. And we have to go through our settings. We'll leave the intensity at 100, but our units should be in watts. Our color would be in the 255 range. Come on. It is 255, 214, and 170. Perfect. Go ahead and close that. The rest of this all looks good. Inverse square. Okay. All our options are good. So let's go back to my set view render 1. There we are. Make it big. And actually, I'm going to go back to my, oops, wrong one. It's going to take too long to see anything if I render in high quality. So I'm going to go back to my lower quality. So we'll come down here and let's do this at maybe 100. And let's render it again. So I'm using the small size to check on how I'm setting things up. So you can see now I have kind of an uplight, a spotlight on that face of the building. So maybe I need a few more. That one looks reasonable from its setting standpoint. Let's go ahead and stop it. And now that I have that one, let's make a few copies. So let's copy, and I'm going to copy it relative to this. Let's put another one. And maybe right there. And why not? We'll put one on each. Sure. And then maybe I want one kind of over in here in the ground a little bit. So let's snap to that point so the height's right. And then let's take it and we can move it over a bit. And this does have to be above where the ground would be. So we can't be down inside the ground. So let's flip around and just make sure. Yep, all that looks pretty good. Let's go back to my set view to my render 1. And again, this is a small render to test. And we'll go ahead and render it again. And we can tell that we've lit up the building with those spots. Okay, so may or may not be something you want to do, but that's obviously something that we're playing around with. And so we'll leave those there. Now, maybe you want to do lighting in a different way. Maybe you don't want spots going up. You could do a rectangular light that washes down a particular surface. So I'm going to do it right along this edge, this little overhang. So let's go ahead and create a rectangular light. Remember, the challenge with rectangular lights is figuring out what the intensity should be. So let's come along here to that end. And I'll come back. To the right. Oh, come on. Like that. And there is a really long and skinny light. Do remember, of course, that it needs to be below the surface. So we need to make sure it's slightly below that surface when it casts its light. And let's go in and let's look at the properties. So we'll go into my V-Ray. There it is, rectangle light. We could rename that to be exterior. Exterior wash. And we're going to go in and change the settings again. So 255, 214, and 170. There it is. And we're going to guess a little bit at the intensity. So I'm going to do radiant power, but I'm going to up this to maybe 150 to give it a shot. Now, there are some options in the rectangular light that we want to check. I'm going to uncheck. I'm going to check, excuse me, I'm going to check invisible. And I don't want it to be double-sided. So I'm going to leave it like that. And you can see the difference if we look at the preview. When it's invisible, we're not seeing the light itself. So it's the only V-Ray light that can be seen. So we'll check that to make it invisible. And then let's go back to our view and do another test. So we'll go to set view, render 1. Let's make it big. And let's go ahead and render it again. And now you can see that I've created that little light wash at the bottom of this patio. Different style light, but certainly something that you could choose to do or not do. So maybe I want to include a few more of those. So I could take that one that I just created, I could copy it. And we could drop it up on this one. There it is. So now I'm washing both of those. And maybe I want one more in here. This one I'd have to create. So we go into my rectangular light. And we go from there to there. And this one's pointing the wrong direction. So let's make sure we flip it. I'll type flip. And that'll cause the arrow to be pointing down. And we do need to, again, make sure that it's not coplanar. So we'll move it down just a bit. That. Now this one's shorter than the other two, so that the intensity is going to have to be a little bit different. And this is, again, one of the challenges with these. Let's see, it is listed as this rectangular light. So we'll call this wash 2. 2. And let's go ahead and 255, 214, and 170. And we're going to change it into watts. That last one was at 150. Let's leave this one at about 100. We'll check for invisible. And then we can go ahead and check on this one. Now, from my current view, I'll go to set view render one, that's actually around the corner, so I'm not going to see it. So it would just appear if I change the view and was rendering from a different perspective. So those are, again, options to get high quality results. Now, what if you want to start embellishing your drawing a little bit? What if you want to add, say, a pool and light a pool? And so this is the one that people always have fun. They ask me about frequently. So I like to go ahead and do it. It's not required as part of your assignment. So this is, again, something that's optional, but I want to show you how I would go about building it. So let's save this for right now. And let's go ahead and first I have to build the geometry of the pool. So let's open up my retreat base. So there it is. Let's open that up. Maybe. We're waiting. All right. So we've got that. Let's go ahead and continue here. Now we have my building all set up. And let's dock that. And where I wanted to add was I wanted to put the pool at the end right here. So if I wanted to put the pool at the end, I would need to start fabricating the pool itself. And of course, you guys are all capable of starting to build out the pool, but let me talk through what I would do in the pool. I've already done it, but first thing I would do is I would create, right, the geometry that holds the pool. So let's see here. Let me turn on this and let's turn on that, right? So let me start with this part. So essentially what I did is I created an extension of the ground here to create the sides of the pool. And then I copied the same little kind of ledge that I created and added the ledge here and around the outside of the pool. That then gives me kind of the outer bounds of the pool. I don't have materials assigned, so I do in fact need to assign some materials. So these surfaces here were on, if I'm not mistaken, sorry. Let's look here. Right, let's go ahead and just assign those all individually. So I'll take these, I'm holding down Shift, those three. Let's go into my V-Ray. Let's go to materials, and I was using the, it wasn't concrete simple, I think. Oh, it is concrete simple. Okay, let me right click and say apply to selection. So that's then been applied. It looks like I already texture mapped them. If I hadn't, right, I would want to take this, go over to my settings, go to my texture mapping. Let's pretend it wasn't done, right? So I just deleted the mapping. There's the original. And I would match the mapping to my existing wall so that the texture appears seamless as it goes forward. That's important. Then I could come down here and look at what this material was. And I actually don't know what it was set at. It looks like it's kind of a basic concrete. Let's go and, I'm not sure I actually have that assigned to a material. So let's go into concrete and let's do the concrete flooring, this one. Drag that in. I'm going to right click and say apply to selection. And then we'll take these other pieces here as well. So let's take this. Hold on. This and this. Then we'll right click and apply those as well. Now I'm not sure if the texture mapping is good enough on it. It's a little bit large. So let's select this as well. And then let's go ahead and go into texture mapping. I'm going to delete all mapping. And then I'm going to do a new box map around all of it. So we'll do a bounding box, world. Yes, we want it capped. And then I'm going to make sure it's x equals y equals z. Actually, I'm going to, yeah, let's do x equals y equals z. And that seems a little bit better. Maybe it's a little bit large. Remember, we can change the repeat. Let's lock it and change the repeat to maybe 3. And that's not too bad. We may need to go in and make some edits afterward. So that gets me the outside of the pool, right? And I have that here on this layer. Now we need to talk about creating the inside of the pool, right? So I need to actually create the pool itself. Now, of course, we could just do rectangles, but if we wanted it to be a smooth bottom pool like this, all we really need, let me hide this for a second, is some profile curves. So this is just like a network surface. So I have a profile curve here that I created. I have a profile curve there that I created. And then I need profiles that go around the outside. Sorry, there's a curve. There's another curve, right? So there's 1, 2, and 3, all roughly going in this direction. And then I have a fourth one that's going in the opposite direction. And then I can create the network surface out of it. So let's turn that back on. Oh, sorry, that's the outside. All right, let me do show, and I end up with this as kind of the pool bottom. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that then represents the pool bottom. Excuse me, that represents the pool bottom right there. Now I have it extending all the way up here, and in order to make it a little bit more realistic, I took these two surfaces that were originally one, and I split them so that I could apply a kind of like a tile to the upper part of the pool. So the bottom part of the pool is just kind of a gray. The upper part of the pool, I used a blue porcelain tile or a blue porcelain material and applied it. It should still be listed here. Now it's still showing. I'm surprised that it's not listed. Let's just go into my ceramic and porcelain, right? And see that the advantage here is even if I don't have the actual blue, right? I could take this green, for example. I could drop it in. We could right click and we could say apply to selection. And it should be the green. And then I can change the color. So let's change it to a nice dark blue. Maybe something like that. And now I have a nice dark blue. The base of the pool here, we just need kind of a gray color. So we could go into concrete, but we could also just create a basic material. So let's go ahead and click a plus. Let's go to materials. Let's do generic. And we can call this pool bottom. And we're looking for kind of a nice generic deep gray. Something like that. Maybe that's a little bit dark. There. All right, perfect. And then we'll right click and say apply to selection. And now that pool bottom's been applied. So again, I've gone through and I've done those materials. We turn the rest of our pool back on, that's good. So the last piece of this is to actually install the water. Now the water is shockingly easy in that we just need a surface. So I've set that surface, it's below the lip here, but it's also above the bottom of the porcelain border on it. And now I need to apply a water texture to it. So I have some water textures. They're available on the course website. If you're struggling to download them, you can send me an email and I'll send them back to you. But I'm going to go ahead and open up V-Ray Asset Editor and I'm going to load that material. So I'll click on the Import Asset File button. I'll go into my OneDrive here. I'm going to go into my resources, into V-Ray. I have V-Ray materials, and I have water. And I have fountain, lake, and ocean. We're going to use the fountain because it's closest in size to the pool. It's water dash fountain. We'll go ahead and load that one up. And there it is. And we should see it there. And we'll right click on it and say apply to selection. And now that's been applied to the surface of the water right here. So at this point, we're basically kind of ready. Let's save it. I'll go to File and then Save. Then jump back to my master site. We'll go into Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. The routine needs to be updated, so we'll go ahead and update it. And now that it's been updated, when I close it, no, after it finishes, we're getting the pool. It looks like maybe I had the pool turned off in this. So let's, oh no, sorry, it was still updating. Let's see. I had those pieces turned off. So we'll make sure that they're turned back on. So let's come back into my render one view. And since this is a night scene, we might as well light the pool as if it was lit. So good way of doing that would be to use a rectangular light. We'll go ahead and create a new rectangular light. I can use the kind of sides of the pool here to represent it. And again, remember, the pool is, this is totally optional. It's for the fun of it, right? So let's select that rectangular light. It's pointing the wrong direction, so let's type flip, followed by enter. And then let's move it so that it's down below the surface of the water. So there it is. Move it down below the surface of the water. So we'll drop it down like that. And then we need to edit the light itself. So we'll open V-Ray. We can double click and call this pool light. Now, instead of setting it up as our traditional yellow, I'm going to actually use a little bit of a bluish tint to it. So maybe something along those lines. All right, so it's kind of this color light. We're going to change this to radiant power watts. And because this rectangle is so big, we really need to increase the size. So let's try 300, maybe 350 actually. Now we want to make sure under our options that it is invisible, so we're not seeing it. And the rest of these are all okay. We don't need it to be double-sided. It's pointing up. Actually, we might need it to be double-sided. Let's go ahead and do a double-sided. So it's shining down on the bottom of the pool as well. And then let's switch back into our render view. Go to set view, render one. And we're going to see a little bit of it there so we can kind of test it out and see. So as I did before, I want my view to be really small before we start the render so we can see if this is even working. So I can already tell the pool isn't going to be strong enough. It's lighting. It's there. We can see it, but it's not quite strong enough. So I'm going to need to increase that light a little bit. So let's stop the render. Then we come back to my lights under pool light. Let's bump this up to maybe 600. We'll stop the render and then we'll render again. It's definitely better, but we may want it a little bit more. We'll have to experiment when we get a higher quality rendering. But we are in fact seeing the lit pool as part of this. We could even switch the view to kind of confirm what's happening here. So I could change my view down and get it closer in, maybe like that. Pan a bit. Now, obviously, this view is a little bit tweaked because it's like we're floating in space. Furthermore, I may need to turn that fence. I may need to get rid of that fence because how would you get in the pool? I guess maybe it could be a gate or something. Let's render it and take a look. Again, it's still small. Come on. I don't really like it. There we go. And actually, in this context, the light's kind of working. We can see it washing up off the wall there. Notice also that we're getting a reflection in the pool, which is something that we should be getting as part of this. So I think this would be an interesting one to kind of push the boundaries a little bit, increase the render power, etc. Okay, so the night settings, you're going to be playing around with the exterior lights and kind of polishing things up. Obviously, I went off on the tangent doing the pool. That's because people have asked me to do it in the past and they find it amusing and interesting. So I'll do a higher quality rendering so that I can show you this a little bit later on. Now, we may end up wanting to do some more fine tuning to something like this. So let's go ahead and stop. And again, I'm doing all of this kind of on the fly here. So let's save this just in case it doesn't work. And let's think about maybe applying a better grass texture to this. Maybe we need to flip back into the daytime because I feel like the nighttime settings are pretty well resolved. I'm unhappy with the material that's on this part of the mountain, however. So let's try to adjust that a little bit. Let's go back into V-Ray. Let's look at ground. Oops. Stop this. Let's go back to ground. And so let's look at these grass materials. So maybe something like that. Let's drop this over. And let's apply it to this. Sorry, this one. Right click and we'll say apply to selection. And so now theoretically that has grass on it. And let's see about adding this is the part where I always fail because it doesn't do what I want it to do. I'm gonna come over here. Let's look at displacement. Here we go. So we're getting into some of the V-Ray properties, and why it's not showing here, I'm not quite sure. But I want to put some fur on this to add some texture to the grass. So this also may crash the render. So it's, like I said, it's an experiment. So let's do a file save. And then actually for posterity's sake, let's do file save as, just in case. And I'm going to do a dash grass so we can see if this is going to work out. Okay, so I've got it selected. I'm going to come over here. It's in the properties, and then we're going to the V-Ray section. And right here under fur, I'm going to click the plus to add some fur. And let's go ahead. I need to move this over so we can see it better. Come on. Remember what I said about it liking to crash? That's why I saved it ahead of time. So we'll see if I can't get this set right. But this is also why I do things live, because if they don't work for me, then you'll see those kinds of problems appear. All right, well, we'll give it a little bit of time and see if it comes back. The good news about the post-processing of the course video is that I can chop out this waste of time. I think ultimately what I picked was too large of a section to try to add this fur to it. So let me go ahead and see if I can kill this, and we'll start again. It'd be nice to know which one it was. All right, let's try that one more time. Let me open it up. Okay, so since it crashed with that larger piece, I'm going to go into the top view and pick just a section. And I'll do that by drawing a little rectangle here, and I will project that down onto my surface, which then if we look at it, gives me just a selection of my surface. And then I can actually split that out. So we're going to take this big surface and we're going to split it with this as my cutting object. And that will then give me this little piece of grass. And so with that little piece of grass, let's see if we can apply a fur to that without it crashing. Let me save it first. All right, so we're going to go into our V-Ray options on this object, and we're going to add a fur. So let's click the little plus sign here. All right, choose an action period, okay. And where are my options showing? Or did it crash again? All right, there's my fur. And let's take a look at my options. So we see it there. Distribution per area. Length for this should be in the default units. So that would be inches. So let's do maybe 18 so that they're taller. Thickness, bend, gravity, all of that sounds good. Variance. All right, let's apply a material. I'm going to choose the grass as my material. So that we have that applied. Let me look at my options here. All right, I think the rest of that is probably okay. So we're going to give that a shot. I don't know for sure that it's going to work, but I think it's worth a try. So let's go here into my set view. We're again going to render 1. So notice that the part that I'm doing is really meant to apply just in front of the building here. And then let's go ahead and give it a test render. I may need to switch to the daytime to really see it, but let's try it again. And again, I'm trying it in the small size. Yeah, I think we're going to end up needing to switch it into the day render to see it. But I can already see that there's some green that's being reflected, and I can see along the edge there are some little stalks of grass. So this is going to take a little bit more experimentation, but I wanted to point that out because it's a component of kind of improving your final renderings. It's not required, but it can help. The other factor in this that you may want to pay attention to is we could easily do collage, collage in some grass hillside in Photoshop in post-processing. So while Photoshop is not part of this class, it's not required, sometimes that's the easiest way. And I talk a lot about renderings as we get toward the end of the semester, where if you know multiple programs, you can save time. So for example, if you know V-Ray and you know Photoshop, you can use the best of V-Ray and the best of Photoshop together, and you can produce something in, say, 5 hours. If you use all V-Ray, you can get the same quality of image, but it might take you 10 hours to do. If you use all Photoshop, you theoretically could get the same quality of render, but it would take you 10 hours to do. So by using them both together, you can actually save time in the long run. So it's something that I like to throw out there, but this class isn't about Photoshop, so you don't have to show me skills in Photoshop to succeed. So yeah, like I said, we're not seeing it that well. I can try a higher quality render to see if we can see it a little bit better. And I also might switch back into the day render to see what that would look like. I do recognize that our time is expiring. It's 12:02. So I'll let you go. The end result today is that we're looking for a nighttime render. That's what you're going to post on the canvas as part of this exercise 223. But also recognize that we're at the place in the semester where you could really be finishing up those 4 required renderings for your assignment 205. The interior and exterior daytime rendering, and the interior and exterior nighttime rendering. Going forward, we're going to start to do more processing of these. So we're going to cut sections, for example. And then we're going to learn how to do line drawings, plans, sections, and elevations. Some of those are required as part of 205 as well. But the bulk of your model really should be done, and the rendering should start to be fine-tuned and ready to be finished. Okay, so I will go ahead and let you finish. I will post, just for your interest, I'll post some of my samples just so you can kind of see what they turn out in a higher quality. So I'll let those render out. But unless anybody has questions, I will let you go, and I'll meet my first check-in group at 12:10.